Rebecca. She's one of the faculty leaders who takes students on a short-term faculty abroad to the Galapagos. Is one of our newest programs that was kicked off, and I could say it was a very successful program because we got a lot of students that were really interested in this. So, Kim, please take it away.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Dee. Like you said, my name is Kim Polkerbeck. I'm in the chemistry department here. And this program is, like you said, we've run it once before, and I'm biased, but I had a great time on it. So it's a short-term faculty-led program to the Galapagos Islands. So I know we've got a couple of students here. The short-term faculty-led programs, or STFLs, they're not a full semester or a full year. It's more in the line of 1 to 2 weeks. This one was 13 days, I believe, our first round, where you're traveling with faculty from UW-Platteville. So for the first round, depends on the number of students, with either 1 or 2 leaders. For the first round, it was myself and Dr. Fields from Civil Engineering. And we're going to the Galapagos Islands to look at environmental science. So looking kind of at how that intersection between the biology and the, I don't know, the science of the place. And the islands are famous for Darwin, their tortoises and their finches and evolution, but then also the intersection of that and the human population. So we spent some time looking at plastics in the ocean and the fact that these are volcanic desert islands with a lack of water, those types of challenges that are presented. So one thing I just want to do quick before we go too much further is to make sure we're all on the same page about where we're at here. So let's see. Really quick here. Ecuador is right down in South America, right on the equator. And where we end up going to is we start in Quito, which is the capital city, and spend about a day in Quito, highlands, high altitude area, and also a day just outside of Quito in a small city called Mindo, which is in the cloud forest, kind of like rainforest, but at a much higher altitude. And then from there, we fly out to the islands. So the Galapagos Islands are about 600 miles off the coast there. And it's an archipelago, a series of several different islands off the coast. We've got 4 inhabited islands. So this big one on the left, that's Isabela. That's one of the inhabited ones. The one in the middle, where Google Maps is showing a single road through the middle, that's Santa Cruz. That's one of the inhabited ones. And then San Cristobal over on the far right is where we begin. So we start in San Cristobal in Puerto Baquerizo Moreno and explore there, and then take a ferry over to Santa Cruz and explore there. And we'll make a handful of day trips to some of the smaller uninhabited islands as well. So you can see Santa Fe in the middle between there. Where else did we end up going? Last time we were at Santiago up here is an uninhabited one. We've made a quick stop there. And also went to Bartolome, there off of the coast of Santiago. Other ones that we might end up visiting depending on how things go. If we look over here, South Plaza Island, that's a smaller one right there, is another great spot. And let's see if I can. And Santa Fe was another possible option. We've also talked about maybe including Española on the next trip as well. That one's down there. So we'll make it to some of the inhabited islands of San Cristobal and also Santa Cruz, and then depending on logistics, some of the uninhabited islands as well. But just to kind of give you a quick overview of literally where in the world are we going. It's right there in the middle of the ocean, right on the equator, and incredibly far away from anything else, which is part of what makes this place so special. So let's see, what else do we need to think about? Give me a second. Kind of a couple of things to think about. Short-term faculty-led program, so traveling with faculty. It's running right now as UW Study 3030. So a 3-credit class counting towards your international educational elective. So you get a gen ed out of it, you get 3 credits, and you get to go to amazing places. And we'll end up seeing both kind of the contrast between our mainland geography, our mainland environment, and then also the similarities and differences being out on these isolated islands. One thing to be aware of with the program, we do have a partnership with USFQ, Universidad San Francisco de Quito, which is one of the bigger universities in Quito. So we've got some people there that we work with that help with both some of the logistics, but also some of the expertise. So one of the nice things about this is that we do get to meet with local experts, local professors, get their take on things, both on the mainland and also on the islands. USFQ has a branch on San Cristobal, so we get to go to their labs and work with their scientists on plastics and things like that. Logistics. We end up having a couple of pre-departure meetings during the fall semester. So probably about 5 pre-departure meetings, a couple hours in the evening. We'll figure out what works for everybody's schedule. And then we'll travel in January. January 22 is the plan right now. So if everything goes okay, then 2022, we get to go back again. And then after return, we do have while we're there, we'll do a service learning project. And so students end up presenting their results from that. So we were aiming for Expo last time before COVID. I think that would be a good fit going forward, but something similar to that where we can present results at the end. Let's see. What do we get to do on this? Well, islands are known for Charles Darwin. So we get to see a lot of the wildlife that Darwin saw when he first visited. We'll observe the finches, we'll observe our giant tortoises in the wild, those types of things, and keep exploring the islands. So one of the things about this, it is an island archipelago. It is a nice, warm, tropical location that we get to escape from Wisconsin to. So we do get to explore both by land and by sea. So we end up doing some hiking through the area. We also end up doing some snorkeling. So we'll snorkel at Kicker Rock and a couple other locations. We went snorkeling, actually, in this picture, you can see where we went snorkeling on one of our stops last time around. And use that as a starting off point, not just to snorkel because snorkeling is awesome, but to use that to start kind of exploring what the environment looks like and what the wildlife look like and what that means, and also to use that as a starting point for making some comparisons. Comparing between different islands. Geography is actually fairly different across different islands. So what that means for the wildlife, what that means for which islands can be and are inhabited, and things along those lines. Let's see. We've got a lot of stops that we make on this. Actually, I'd rather do that from here. Itinerary from our first trip. Pre-departure meetings, arrival in Quito. We've got about 1 day in Quito to explore the capital there and 1 day in the cloud forest before we go over to San Cristobal. So looking through this, San Cristobal Interpretive Center and Frigate Bird Hill. The Interpretive Center in San Cristobal is sort of the visitor center, if you will. Most of the islands are actually a national park, so there are a lot of restrictions on who's allowed to go where, when, and with whom. They have a pretty strict schedule of only a certain number of boats are allowed to visit particular sites each day. And you're only allowed to travel to certain areas of the islands, and it has to be with a naturalist guide, things like that. So we use the Interpretive Center as a starting off point to start getting a sense for the islands, what they're all about and what they look like. And Frigate Bird Hill, also in that area, is a great place to start exploring some of the wildlife. So we can climb up and start getting a visual overview of the land and also getting an idea of the lay of the land and also the the frigate birds, for example, the wildlife in that area. Switching things around a little bit, I'm going to skip day 5 and go to day 6. San Cristobal Highlands, Junco Lagoon, Galapagos, and Puerto Chino. So what does that day look like? The El Junco Lagoon is one of the only surface freshwater sources in the entire archipelago. It is a volcanic archipelago, volcanic islands. And if you walk, you're not going to see permanent surface water. And depending on the season, there is a rainy season and a dry season. So depending on the season, you might find some puddles, if you will, or even things that look more like a pond. But the Junco Lagoon is the only permanent freshwater source, the surface freshwater source. So we'll take that as an opportunity to look at the overall environment. What does that mean for habitation, for the inhabitants of the island? The Galapagos is the tortoise breeding center. So we cannot go to the Galapagos Islands without starting to think about the giant tortoises. And we'll have a chance to both see those in the wild a little bit later, but also to look at some of the programs that are going on with regard to trying to maintain the existing species, but also to help some of the species that are in danger to recover. The tortoises are different in terms of there's different species between the different islands, with some of the populations doing better than others. And Puerto Chino is, in short, an amazing beach that's right near those things. Kicker Rock. So what you're seeing in the photo behind the text here is Kicker Rock. It's a small island, or 2 islands really, if we move the text, off the coast of San Cristobal. And if you look at the picture, it's a steep drop. It literally looks like a rock sticking in the water. And it looks the same underwater as well. And it goes straight down. It looks about the same, just underwater. It's a nice place for snorkeling because it's offshore and it's deep water. So we get to see there a lot of the deep water species that we wouldn't necessarily see snorkeling from shore. And we get to see, it's a great place for seeing things like sharks and some of the sea turtles and a lot of the deeper water fishes there as well. Backwards to day 5, Service Project and Recycling Center. So one of the nice things about our partnership with USFQ is that we do get to take advantage of their staff and their resources, their labs on the islands. So they have some great people down there who are doing research in a lot of different areas. And the one that we've been interacting with, Daniela, she's working on looking at plastics in the islands. So if you think about the Pacific Ocean, you start thinking about plastics, you think about the islands of plastics that exist there. The Galapagos Islands are not part of that whole, there's an island of plastic floating around in the middle of the ocean, but they do see the effects of that. So we can see the effects of those plastics being washed up on the beaches there. And Daniela is one of the staff that's working on studying that, where they're coming from and why and what to maybe do about that. So one of the things that we end up doing is working with her team to go out and actually collect plastics off of the beach and start contributing to that data collection. And collecting plastics, organizing them, figuring out where things came from, and again, what the solutions might be. So that's kind of that service project day. We visit the recycling center as part of that to get an idea of what's being done on land, and then also did some collection on the beachfront as well. So after some time in San Cristobal, then we start taking the ferry over to Santa Cruz. That was the inhabited island in the middle. And from there, there's the Charles Darwin Research Center there, which does a great job of both informational displays over all of the different challenges on the islands, but also the Galapagos in San Cristobal focuses more on tortoise breeding for the tortoises on San Cristobal. The Charles Darwin Research Center does more with all the species of tortoises across the entire archipelago. So there we get more of a chance to see some of the differences between the tortoise species and also some of the other wildlife on the islands that they're working on there as well. Let's see, what else do we have? Day 9, Santa Cruz Highlands and Tortuga Bay. All right, Santa Cruz Highlands. That is where we get to go and actually observe the giant tortoises in the wild. And Tortuga Bay is off of the is a little bit closer to the main town, where I've got some pictures a little bit later, where we might see some of the marine iguanas and other more of the shallow water wildlife. So South Plaza Islands or Santa Fe Islands or Bartolome and Santiago, as far as which uninhabited islands we end up visiting, that becomes partially an issue of where we want to go and partially an issue of, again, it's a national park and availability is limited, but we will spend at least one day visiting some of the uninhabited islands so that we can get that sense of contrast. We spend most of our time on San Cristobal and Santa Cruz, which are some of the larger islands, but we also need to make sure we visit some of the uninhabited ones, the smaller islands, to get that contrast of the different environments. And yes, actually different environments between the different islands. So that's another thing we can look at. And Santa Cruz is a much higher elevation than something like South Plaza or Bartolome, where we're in enough of the desert region that the altitude actually makes a difference. How many clouds can you catch? The more clouds you can catch, the more water you can have. And the more water you can have, the more this looks like a jungle instead of a desert. So that's for day 10 in there, where we start getting to see that actual contrast. During a coffee farm, meeting with Maria Elena. So one of the things that we need to look at are not just the biology, the islands themselves, but also the human impact. So we can look at that in terms of plastics and maybe what we might think of some of the negative impacts. And we can also look at the coffee farm and see what other industries, if you will, exist there. So we went to Lava Java last time, where Maria Elena is actually growing coffee beans, coffee plants, and producing coffee there. It's actually a pretty fabulous region for producing coffee, as it turns out, in some of those highlands areas. So we can look at some of the other aspects of the economy, some of the other aspects of life on the islands there. And eventually we have to come home because, I don't know, I guess that's part of study abroad, short-term program, we have to come home eventually. So returning to Quito and then returning to Chicago overnight there. A couple of just pictures. I know I was going through some pictures at the beginning, but just to give you a quick sense here. Mindo, so this is the cloud forest outside of Quito. And a couple of things that we were doing there. It's a region that's it's hard to describe a cloud forest if you've never been to one, but the best analogy I've got is a jungle. And one of the main types of wildlife there are the hummingbirds. So we spent quite a bit of time watching the hummingbirds fly by, which is actually an amazing experience. And then exploring a little bit, we had a handful of engineers in our program last time. We went to go look at the underside of a bridge, go check out their structural engineering for a few minutes. We were also looking for some of the bird species that had a nest under there, but you get a couple of different things at once. Other things that we were doing there, looking at the process of growing cacao and making chocolate. So we got to do some chocolate tasting, both in the sense of actually tasting the raw cacao beans and also looking at the process of manufacturing the chocolate, drying the beans and turning it into chocolate, and then tasting that. That was amazing too. Let's see, wildlife. You cannot go to the Galapagos and not see wildlife. It is impossible. So we think about things like the marine iguanas and the giant tortoises, the sea lions. It's impossible to go and not see wildlife. So the picture on the bottom left is the main city, actually the main city in the whole islands, but the main town in on Santa Cruz. So what you're seeing in the background is the dock, and that's, the dock. That's where the boats come in. That's where people get to this island from Santa Cruz to other islands. And then the sea lions are there. So you go to the beach and there are sea lions. You go to the other beach. So on the bottom right, we're over at trying to get to Tortuga Bay, trying to walk there. And you have to kind of be careful that you don't step on the marine iguanas. You got to make sure you give them their space and walk around them, which presents a little bit of a problem. So that's one of my favorite aspects is you don't go to the islands and drive for 12 hours to try and get your one sighting of a tortoise off in the distance. You go to the islands and then you make sure that you take 10 steps back and avoid the wildlife and give them a little bit of space. It's really a unique location in that regard. Couple things to be aware of. It is an active trip. So you'll see written in a few places that the ability to swim and the ability to walk over uneven ground are requirements for the program. So the first 3 pictures here are from our beach cleanup day. And when we say walk over uneven ground, yes, we are actually walking across lava rocks because that's how you get to places, or walking through the cacti. So yeah, it is a physical active trip. There is definitely a walking requirement and a swimming requirement. It is not that shouldn't be a deterrent. I think everyone was fine, but it's definitely, you definitely need to be mobile for this trip, for good or for bad. The bottom right-hand picture, that's El Junco, the lagoon. So that's our freshwater source down there, and the group in front. So we got to spend some time there actually watching the frigate birds come and dip their wings and wash off all the salt water in the freshwater. Cool. We talked a little bit about our student engagement project. So working with the plastics and visiting the recycling center. So the top left is actually the recycling center. The bottom, the far right is part of our beach cleanup project. In addition to actually grabbing the large plastic items that we can find, one of the things that we do, or that Daniela does, is to start surveying smaller areas where we're looking for microplastics. So sifting through the sand there to get a sense of how many individual tiny particles, microplastics, little itty bitty pieces that you can barely see, are mixed in with the sand. And then down at the bottom, we've got Maria Elena talking to us about the coffee making process. And overall, this is one of the nice things about this program is that we get to meet with Maria Elena. We get to work with Daniela. We get to work with all the different staff down there. The islands are a national park. So most of the places we're going, we're accompanied by a national park guide, which means that we get to pick the national park guide's brain for hours on end. And that in and of itself is something that's pretty cool, being able to actually talk to people who are genuine experts in this area. Let's see, more pictures from our plastics project back in lab, trying to sort things out and organize and categorize what we found. And up at the recycling center, looking at what they're collecting on land. Handful of other things to kind of think about before we go too much further. Have to be able to swim and walk. It's just part of it. A couple of sort of logistics for the program. Cost ends up being somewhere in that 4,500 up to 5,000 range, which includes things like international flights, your flights within Ecuador. So the flight from Quito out to the islands is actually not a cheap flight, and it includes your entrance to the islands. So for frame of reference, if you're standing in Quito and all you want to do is fly to the islands, get off the airplane, smile, and fly back, the flights and the entrance and the, whatever they call it, the tourist card or whatnot, end up costing about $600, $650. And that's all that is included in this cost. Lodging's included. Most of the places that we stay have breakfasts included. And because a lot of our excursions are day-long excursions, most of the lunches are included as well in that. So it doesn't include getting yourself to Chicago to catch the flight. It doesn't include most of the dinners. and then sort of the personal spending, passport, application fee, vaccines that may be required, those types of things. But that 5,000 does include most everything once we get there. And that puts it at the higher end of the short-term programs on campus, but it also puts it way lower than most of the other programs to the Galapagos Islands. So feel free to Google all the other programs to the Galapagos Islands that are out there at other universities. This comes in at like half of what a lot of those cost, and I'm kind of proud of that. So there. All right. In a nutshell, that's our program. But the main question would be, what do you guys want to know? What questions do you have? So what can I help you guys with? What can I tell you about?
I have a question.
Yes.
If I can't swim but still want to go, am I still able to participate?
Yes. Yes. So if you can't swim, then there is an option of staying on the boat for the snorkeling part. If you can swim, but you're not convinced you can swim, there are life jackets. So, and that's a legit thing. When we were snorkeling at Kicker Rock, there were multiple students who wore life jackets while snorkeling. And we had a couple of guides in the water with little buoy flotational things. So safety wise, I'm convinced nobody's going to drown, but we've got life jackets, we've got buoys to hold on to, and worst case scenario, you could stay on the boat if you had to. But we also, I will say, we had some people that were not 100% confident in their swimming abilities and didn't realize that they were snorkeling at Kicker Rock for over an hour before they asked to hold on to the buoy, just because they were thinking maybe they were starting to get tired. Because you're watching incredible things go by and you forget time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What other questions can I help with? Brooke, Sally, anything I can help you guys with?
I guess this isn't really about the sorry. This isn't really about the Galapagos, but are there other environmental programs for like short term on campus?
I think you're better off answering that one, but I don't.
This is the only one as of right now. But if it's an interest, and a lot of students are reaching out for other different types, that's something I will be pushing for more various programs. So even with Kim's help with this particular program, that might set up some more other faculty opportunities, saying like, hey, students really want to do this. They want to try other different places. So maybe that will help kickstart more faculty to get more involved with doing short-term faculty-led programming. So in the future, hopefully, that is the plan.
Okay, thanks.
And I know they are starting, well, I guess it started now, but they are starting an environmental science major, or is it major or program on campus? Not sure yet.
It's a major.
Is it? Okay.
That's my major.
Okay. And I've talked quite a bit to, let's see, Dr. Underwood and, oh my goodness. I'm entirely drawing a blank on his name. Evan. I don't know Evan's last name. But I've talked to both of them quite a bit about this program, and they've expressed an interest in this program and trying to look at other options as well. So I know they're in the loop on study abroad and looking at options and what might be out there. So, my goodness, why can I not think of his name? Oh, other questions? Brooks, any questions?
No, none from me.
Okay. What else do you guys want to know about either this program or study abroad in general, or what maybe put it a different way, what would it take to convince you guys to go on study abroad? Even if it's not this program, what would it take to convince you guys to go on study abroad?
I'm planning on going to Australia, hopefully in 2023. So
excellent. So not much to convince you. Excellent. That being said, I will say that I know lots of people who have done more than one study abroad program because it's addictive. And you go somewhere and then all of a sudden you realize that you want to go back or you want to go somewhere new. So there's nothing wrong with considering multiple study abroad programs.
That is true. You can go get your feet wet doing a short-term fac led, and from there you can do a semester or year-long somewhere else. I was able to do that. So when I first came during my undergrad experience, I started with a short-term faculty led, got hooked on, I did a year. So you can definitely do both.
Yep, absolutely. I didn't have quite the same experience. I did in my undergrad, I did a roughly semester long program. But I kind of got hooked and now all of a sudden I'm here doing this. So it's addictive. Other questions, thoughts, things that I can tell you guys about? Or should we just sit and look at pictures for hours on end and wish that we were all there?
Well, that was a really great presentation. So thanks for sharing that with us. Just if you want to send me the recording or if you have any questions about how to download a recording or anything, I have some directions I sent to some other faculty and stuff that I can send. And we'll share this in the Teams and on our website within the next week or so once I gather all those recordings. But yeah, if you guys have any further questions or anything pops up in the future, you can definitely reach out to Kim, or you can reach out to me or even myself, and we'll get you in the right direction depending on if you're looking at this particular program, short-term faculty-led in general, or like any other study abroad programming options. You can definitely reach out to us.
And actually, if you guys don't mind, if you want to put your name and email address in the chat, then we can start keeping you guys on the list for, at this point, you would be committing probably to getting an email with more information in the fall once we actually have fixed dates and things like that. So not a huge commitment, but if you're interested in getting follow-up emails, then just go ahead and put your name and email in the chat and we'd be happy to send that along.
And there's a interest/attendance form in the Teams. It's in the general channel on the top tabs, or there's also a link in the channel itself. So you can fill that out and you can mention which programs you're interested in. It's also to use if you had to attend some different events for classes or scholarships or things like that. It's a way for us to track that for those reasons as well. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Thank you, Kim, on a wonderful presentation. Again, I'm really